fundamentally, cash is more anonymous than crypto is. Holding crypto is pseudonymous. You can always find out who is behind there. Whereas, cash is completely a bearer instrument, and that will always be the money launderer's friend over crypto. I think it's the perception that it's only used for illicit purposes and it doesn't have a real use case.
People do think of crypto worse than cash, really, don't they? When you look at those parts, they wouldn't really think of the cash being more dirty. They would look at the crypto.
The other one, which doesn't relate to stablecoins but more to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, is that it's a Ponzi scheme.
John Stathacopoulos is a global head of compliance at Velocity, a next-generation financial infrastructure platform re-engineering how capital moves across banks, blockchains, and borders. Velocity delivers programmable, compliant payment and treasury infrastructures that unifies fiat and digital asset rails, enabling enterprises to manage liquidity, optimize treasury operations, and execute real-time cross-border settlement with clarity and control. With a compliance career spanning both traditional regulatory financial services and decentralized finance, John sits at the nexus of governance, growth, and institutional trust. He leads the development of robust compliance frameworks that safeguard regulatory integrity while also enabling high-velocity capital flows, which ensures innovation and control advancement together. In today's conversation, John explores how high-growth financial infrastructure businesses balance speed with control and what modern compliant leadership really looks like inside a company that is scaling at phenomenal pace. Welcome to Voicing Compliance episode 5. Today we are lucky enough to have the head of compliance from Velocity, John Stathacopoulos. Welcome, John. How are you doing?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How
Thanks
was your
very
journey?
much for having me.
No problem. How was your journey in?
Yeah, all good. Just an easy cycle over from my flat, so 10, 15 minutes.
Good,
quite
man.
Nice morning for it.
Yeah, good, man. Well, thanks for coming in.
Absolutely.
John, obviously know you well, done a bit of work with Velocity over the past 10, 15 months. So excited to have you on and talk about your journey and the businesses. For the listeners who are tuning in, would you mind just giving an overview of yourself and what Velocity are currently doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's John Stathacopoulos, as you said.
Got it right.
Yeah, exactly. The global head of compliance for Velocity. So Velocity is a relatively new startup operating in the stablecoin payments space. We are headquartered in the UK. So I joined the company in June last year. So it's about 8-9 months. Effectively charged with building out the entire compliance framework, building out the compliance department. We've got a pretty aggressive licensing strategy, which we can talk about a little bit today. So leading on all of those sorts of efforts.
Good. You enjoying it so far?
Yeah, having a lot of fun. I think when you and I first started speaking, kind of outlining what my ideal job was, this really did hit the sweet spot. Looking at that kind of brand new company where I can get involved, help build out the business in a relatively exciting space. Obviously, there's a bit of a risk. You don't know who you're going to be working with, but everyone in the company's turned out to be, one, incredibly capable, and two, really, really nice people. So it's been a really good 8-9 months so far.
Awesome, and it looks good. Is it fast paced? I'm guessing it's pretty fast day to day.
It's crazy. I mean, I've been in the crypto space for about 7 years now, so I'm used to the fast pace, but this is kind of on another level, but all for the right reasons. It's fast-paced, trying to get our licenses, trying to do things properly. We recognize the value that compliance has from a commercial perspective. So it means I can partner really well with the commercial team and the revenue side of things, but we want to build ourselves up and start operating really quickly. So pace is part of the game.
Awesome. And where are they operating at the moment, Velocity? Which sort of locations are you currently based in?
So we're headquartered out of the UK, so we'll be going for our FCA permissions. We're looking for our MiCA license in Europe. We're looking at setting up in Australia, the UAE, the US, and then I think once all of those targets have settled down, we'll start looking at certain other jurisdictions, most likely in Asia, South America.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks for that. So obviously today we're going to be talking about stablecoins, MiCA, and compliance within crypto. For people that maybe have heard the word stablecoin, know a little bit, or maybe don't really know, could you give just a brief overview into what stablecoins are?
Yeah, absolutely. So stablecoins are a cryptocurrency that are pegged to a underlying fiat currency. So the most common stablecoins out there are US dollar denominated. So you've got, let's say, Tether and Circle probably make up the largest market cap. Both of those are linked, essentially pegged one-to-one to the dollar. It's pegged by buying underlying assets that are relatively liquid. So yeah, pegged to the dollar by buying an underlying asset like a money market fund, like a US Treasury, essentially secure assets, and then minting and redeeming on a one-to-one basis.
Awesome.
So the idea is that it always holds a one-to-one peg with the underlying currency.
And what would you say the main point of stablecoin is in terms of what they're solving?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because so when I first got into the space, I was talking to a colleague about this the other day. I think 2019 was the first time I heard about stablecoins, and the use case back then is quite different to the use case today. And I think a lot of that has to do with the institutional adoption of digital assets or cryptocurrencies as a whole. So in 2019, they were used because people couldn't get banking rails into crypto. So once you had bought your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, your Solana, the big cryptos at the time, you didn't want to trade out of that into a fiat currency because you didn't really have a mechanism to do so, or you might not be able to get back in. But you didn't always want to hold your value in the Bitcoin itself. So they came up with the stable coins to keep people on chain. With a fiat currency, with a fiat denominated currency, but without ever having to move that off chain. Now, the last year and a half, 2 years, stablecoins have become a much bigger buzzword than what they've been in the past. And I think what people have realized, and this follows on from the institutional adoption we've seen in the industry, is stablecoins are money and they can be used like money, and they have similar attributes to regular fiat money, but at the same time they have attributes linked to the blockchain that bring in efficiency, low cost, etc., that people are looking to take advantage of now.
Awesome. Even dumbed it down for me. Do you think, because it seems to be booming now, everyone's talking about it, why do you think it's evolving so fast and so much, do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, over the last few years, I've spent my career working on the institutional side of things. So crypto is retail focused for a very long time, but the last few years, particularly when you get companies like BlackRock that are building up ETFs, money market funds that are tied to crypto, pension funds that are starting to invest in it, you've seen a lot bigger institutional adoption, and that's led to a maturity in the industry. A lot of the big players, the big banks, the big institutions that we all know about are starting to utilize this, and it's finding its own use case. Last year, you had Stripe, one of the biggest checkout payment companies in the world, acquiring on and off ramp stablecoin provider called Bridge. That really kind of triggered everything going on in the market and really validated the use case for stablecoins, and has led to the Visas, the MasterCards, the big players that the incumbents that have been in the space for a long time to really get interested and start to explore it.
Yeah, it seems like it's going crazy everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. It's on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
companies are adopting it. It seems it's a big buzzword at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, Goldman Sachs last year called it Stablecoin Summer in their report. Now, a colleague of mine, our head of product, actually started calling it Stablecoin Summer first. So potentially GS stole that away from him. Yeah. But when they went to Jackson Hole last year, and the big institutions were discussing, and I think the report that came out of that, stablecoins really was the buzzword. And now you have the regulation that really follows. So in the US, you got the Genius Act, the Clarity Act. In the EU, you've got MiCA, the UK, the FSMA regime starting to apply to crypto. So, all of that lends legitimacy to the industry, and following on from that, you get bigger institutional adoption.
And why do you think the regulators are taking such an interest in it at the moment? They seem to be taking more of an interest than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been interested in it a long time. So crypto has been regulated to an extent. Okay. So most jurisdictions have had a money laundering regime. So in the UK, you had to be on the FCA's money laundering register in order to operate and provide crypto asset services. You were subject to the same AML legislation that you would have been if you were any other financial institution, but you weren't subject to the same regulations, the prudential regulations, the conflicts of interest, the other regulatory aspects, safeguarding, etc. But that's all now evolving, because I think what regulators now understand is, what is the asset and how can they best regulate it? But you're now starting to see a diversion of how different jurisdictions and bodies are looking to regulate the space.
Okay. That makes sense. Awesome. How would you say sort of stablecoin is different to maybe like e-money or maybe other crypto? What would you say?
So I think stablecoin, as I said, is a cryptocurrency that's pegged to an underlying fiat currency. E-money is more of a digital representation of fiat. And so you have a claim against the issuer of the e-money. So that could be a Revolut, that could be a JP Morgan, a bank, or whatever it might be. And then you get other cryptocurrencies which range from Bitcoin to meme coins, which live on the blockchain, but they don't have that same sort of stable link to an underlying rate.
Okay, awesome. Do you think there's any threats to stablecoin? Any sort of challenges that you really see?
It's interesting at the moment because the industry seems to be challenged right now, where people have been selling out of Bitcoin. Right. I think you've seen a big crash in the price over the last 3 odd months. But that's kind of indicative of it maybe being a speculative asset. So with some of the geopolitics that are going on, people sell out of the riskier assets and buy into the safe havens, the US dollar, the golds, etc. Whereas while you've seen the price of Bitcoin going down and the market cap being reduced, you've actually seen the market cap of stablecoins increasing. Okay. So it's impossible to say in 10 years' time what's going to exist and what's not going to exist. But I think at the moment, it really does look like stablecoins are stable. The use case is being validated, and instead of trading out of your cryptocurrencies and swapping that for your underlying fiat, people are probably trading into stablecoins more regularly than they used to be before.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And what about MiCA? A keyword, another buzzword. People are talking about it all the time. If you were to kind of explain what MiCA is, what it's all about to a founder, what would you sort of say?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what that founder's background is.
Let's say not crypto.
Yeah, so if you've worked in traditional finance, particularly in an investment firm, if you've done trading, worked in derivatives, etc., you'll be familiar with MiFID 2 in the EU. MiCA is MiFID for crypto. Okay. And so it's taken that money laundering regime, so the VASP regime that they had in the EU, and it's upgraded it to a full authorization regime, and that's consistent across the block of the EU member states. Okay.
And how hard do you think getting these licenses are currently at the moment?
It actually depends on the member state.
And the location, I guess.
Yeah, and the location. So, Poland is a member state that has not yet implemented MiCA into local law. It's a regulation from the EU, so it is required to be implemented locally. And so in Poland, it's actually impossible to get your MiCA authorization because the KNF, the local regulator, hasn't opened their authorization gateway. There's certain other member states that are being accused of fast tracking some of the processes by some of the other member states or by ESMA. And then you've got, let's say, your kind of gold standard states where it's going to take you 9 months to a year to get your authorization. But with anything, it largely, almost wholly depends on how complete your application is. If you can submit a complete application to the regulator that covers, everything that they're asking for, all the policies, the procedures, and then you have the infrastructure behind that to support it, and you can prove that, generally your application process is going to be a lot more straightforward. When you have gaps in your program, when you don't have competent people, when you don't fully understand what the regulations mean and what you're supposed to do, that is going to lead to a significant amount of back and forth with the regulator, and that's going to lead to either a rejection or a very long application window. So a lot of the timeline will depend on the institution.
No, I'd agree. I think from what I'm experiencing, a lot to do is to do with the team, the people that you've got in place, and how strict they are with the application. I think if people are trying to cut corners or don't really understand it, you can see where rejections are coming and blocking, basically. Do you think more and more companies are going to try to get these licenses now within this space?
Yeah, look, so MiCA rolled out a grandfathering period, which each member state was allowed to implement. So when MiCA came in at the end of 2024, they implemented a grandfathering period, so a timeline for firms to get authorized. Member states were then able to choose how long to allow that grandfathering period to run for in their local countries. The longest they can run for is till the 30th of June this year. And so by the end of June this year, if you haven't got your MiCA authorization, you cannot provide services. Right. So you should be seeing the majority of firms that were already operating, already obtaining their MiCA licenses, and then anyone else is going to have to start from scratch. So you've probably seen the bulk of MiCA authorized firms already being authorized, and then the rest of them are likely going to fall away.
Okay, that's good to know. And what would you say the regulators are really looking for? Like, what does good look like from their point of view, do you think?
It does depend on the regulator, but I think it is a very much a holistic viewpoint. So they want to know, does the entity have local minded management? So if you're an international company, are you just, let's say, a letterbox entity with 2 people on the ground, or do you have a managing director and a local MLRO and the right level of control infrastructure and personnel on the ground? They want to see that the governance structures are in place. They want to see that your money laundering program is in place, and then every other aspect of MiCA that applies to the permissions you're asking for are being met. So, as an example, if you're executing orders on behalf of clients, you need to have a best execution program in place. And so it's everything related to the specific permissions you're asking for. All of that needs to be done to high spec.
Okay, it's good to know. And do you think the regulations slow down innovation, or do you think they mature the space? What would you say on that point?
It's an inherent conflict, right? It will always slow down innovation, but at the same time, it's absolutely necessary. And the space has been unregulated for a long time. We've seen a lot of innovation. I'd say not a lot of it has been great innovation, but it has led to the concept of the blockchain. It has led to these underlying assets that there is real utility for. So the innovation has happened, but now the regulation's bringing the safeguards around it. Yeah. Regulation will always be behind innovation, and it always will have to catch up. It's the nature of the game. And so what you're seeing now are the regulators trying to catch up and trying to do so intelligently. So rather than just whacking out regulation without actually understanding what they're regulating, regulators are taking their time, understanding what the actual core use of the assets are, whether there's similarities to what's existed before, if this is brand new, and then figuring out how to intelligently regulate that.
Seems like they're more strict on it now. Everyone's taking it a bit more seriously. People are more aware of it. Do you think that's going to help the space really?
Honestly, it depends which side of the space you're on. I mean, if you're, a crypto maximalist from 2009 and the cypherpunk, like, this is your worst nightmare. This is not what you signed up for, and it's not what you believe the point of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is.
So the newer people will like it, and maybe the older people that are
involved. But the institutional side of things will quite enjoy the regulation, because it does bring legitimacy to it.
Okay. Without MiCA, where do you think crypto would be?
I don't think you'd have the institutional adoption that has followed suit. I think MiCA was also one of the most advanced crypto-specific regulations that have come out globally from a tier 1 jurisdiction or body, the EU. And so you've seen multiple other jurisdictions following suit after MiCA came out. And so I think it has been very much a leader in the space of how to regulate digital assets. The EU always said that this is the first iteration. We will come back to it. DeFi is a great example. They've chosen not to regulate DeFi under MiCA because they want to fully understand it and come back to it. Okay. And so I think what MiCA has caused is more regulators to understand how to regulate the space, and then start following suit.
It can only be for the good, but it seems like it's a lot going on and a lot of people to learn and understand.
It is a lot. And then you've got kind of every jurisdiction has a different way of imposing the regulations and a different way of thinking about it. Some, like the UK, are extending their existing financial regulations, so FSMA, to crypto, whereas MiCA is a brand new act specific to crypto.
Is it hard to stay up to date with all, like in terms of like the trends? I guess, like, how do you actually do that? How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, look, as a compliance department, we have regulatory horizon scanning obligations, so we need to stay on top of the regulations that apply to us in the jurisdictions where we operate, as well as industry body notifications and updates. So like the FATF, we need to stay on top of their grey country list, etc. So we speak to local council. We've got tools. We sign up to newsletters. I mean, I've signed up to about 5 or 6 different regulators
every day.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very helpful. So the FCA, for example, they've been great actually. Like the amount of content that they've produced, specifically over the last 4 months. I mean, it was a nice little Christmas present from the FCA, publishing about 700 pages of consultation papers just before Christmas. But that's all really useful information because it's transparent to the industry of what the regulator is looking like. And when you have the opportunity to respond, it opens the dialogue between the private and the public side of things. So, there's a lot of different sources and ways to stay on top of things. It depends on the jurisdiction, but as a compliance department, it's our obligation to really keep on top of it. Exactly right.
And moving away from stablecoins more to like head of compliance, I guess, in that role, what would you interested when I'm speaking to guests in terms of like difficult conversations? What would you say? Any that stand out for you as a head of compliance that you've really had to have a difficult conversation?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a conflict between compliance and the commercial side of things, but it's how that conflict can be resolved. In past jobs, that conflict has come to a head and it's led to arguments. Whereas what I've found at Velocity is it's an incredibly collaborative environment. So what it means is I can come in on the very conservative side of things. The commercial team can come in a little bit more on the commercial side of things. But we can meet.
They don't see you as the blocker.
Exactly.
Together, is it?
It's the answer is a no. The answer is maybe we can't do it like that, but let's figure out how we can do it. There's always going to be red lines from compliance. You can't deal with a sanctioned jurisdiction, for example. That's pretty cut and dry. But for the most part, it won't work exactly like this, but what if we change it? And it's about meeting in the middle that helps those difficult conversations.
That's awesome. It's good that I think you need the buy-in from everyone, don't you, really? The product people, the engineers, the founders, and if they don't take it seriously, your job's difficult. But if they see you as a value add versus a blocker and you all work together, it's only going to go one way.
That's exactly right. And part of my joining Velocity, it's a risk for any compliance officer to join a new startup because they don't have history behind them and that you don't know, spoke to the founders, I knew what they wanted, but until I actually worked with them, those are just words. But everything that they've committed to, whether it's, budget, headcount, ambitious licensing strategy, we've activated those plans. And so having a founder, having a management team that has bought into the compliance strategy that I'm designing or I'm helping lead the conversations on has made my job so much easier. That's awesome. So we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. It's not really a crunchy situation. It's a pretty easy dynamic situation.
That's refreshing because I've spoken to loads of people who've done different roles and they're just banging their heads against a wall, and if you can't get the buy-in, the role becomes very difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. It's to an extent it becomes untenable as a compliance officer. You have your obligations and your red lines and your commitment to the regulator and to keeping the firm safe. And if you're not able to do that anymore, then effectively you can't perform your job effectively at that institution.
Cool. And looking sort of 5-10 years ahead, who do you think sort of survives? Do you think that's fintechs, banks, crypto companies?
That's the big question that I think a company in our position is trying to figure out. Yeah, I think what you're going to get is you're already seeing it now. I mean, like there was a lot of noise about stablecoins last year. And a lot of companies that are looking to do pretty similar things to what we're looking to do. Some of them are succeeding, some of them have fallen away. There's been some acquisitions in the space. So the industry's still feeling itself out and figuring itself out. The incumbents, and by that I mean the big financial institutions, they're not going anywhere, and they are working in the space. And so it is a question of when do they get fully involved in it? What are they looking to roll out? How are they going to do that? Are they doing that organically or inorganically? There's been a few acquisitions last year that could have been massive, like MasterCard looked to buy a company. They chose not to. Coinbase looked to buy the same company. They also chose not to. So there is kind of consolidation prospects in the industry that could happen, but at the same time there could be a Revolut of the world that kind of just becomes this high flyer that comes out of takes over exactly.
And what about if you could change one thing with, I guess, how crypto firms and regulators interact? Is there anything you would change? Is there anything you're seeing that maybe is missing?
I think what I've seen with the FCA has been really good. Okay. And I just hope that more regulators have been that interactive with the firms that are looking to be regulated, because being transparent with us allows us to be transparent with them. And so the FCA, they've been very clear with how they're going to regulate the space, with what FSMA is going to look like and how that's going to apply, very clear on timelines. So all of that is known to us, and that's incredibly helpful. And then on top of that, they've opened themselves up for pre-application support meetings, which means that you can just have a effectively non-committal meeting with the FCA before you've applied to be authorized by them to talk through issues or present your business case. They're not going to advise you. They're not your consultants, but they will listen to you and they will talk to you, which is really, really helpful from a regulator. So I think it's on the right track, particularly in the UK, to have a good relationship between the public and private side of things.
It sounds like they're evolving more and they're giving you more information to do your job, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes with, ideally they've got more case officers, they understand the space more, they're regulating it intelligently, and they have the personnel behind them to support that.
There still seems to be the odd misconception about crypto, I'd say. If you could change one thing about that, what would it be?
Yeah, it's not always wrong. That's the problem. I mean, stablecoins is a good example. People point to Tether and say, I mean, I don't know what the exact stats are, but the amount of usage of Tether for illicit purposes, whether that's breach of sanctions or drugs or whatever it might be. If you look at a Chainalysis or an Elliptic report, they'll show you the use cases of this. But fundamentally, cash is more anonymous than crypto is. So holding crypto is pseudonymous. You can always find out who is behind there. Whereas cash is completely a bearer instrument, and that will always be the money launderer's friend over crypto. So I think it's the perception that it's only used for illicit purposes and it doesn't have a real use case. The comment section and the FT is on any crypto article is probably my favorite place in the world. If you want to see what the misconceptions are,
it's all there.
Go there. It is genuinely funny and just entertaining to watch.
But you're right, though. People do think of crypto worse than cash, really, don't they? When you look at those parts, they wouldn't really think of the cash being more dirty. They would look at the crypto.
Exactly. And then the other one, which doesn't relate to stablecoins but more to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, is that it's a Ponzi scheme. It's not. I think it's been validated, it's been tested over the last 17 years since 2009, especially over the last 7 or so years. But I think it's been validated, and the common referral is to the tulip craze in the Netherlands. It's just not a bubble like that. It's not a Ponzi scheme. I think it's if people are willing to pay a price for something, then it's got a market value, and that's what the price is.
What about, obviously you've worked for big businesses, you've gone into a startup. From a compliance point of view, if we're talking to like founders or startups, when do you think they should bring compliance in or consider? Because what I'm seeing from my point of view is people are bringing it in too late, maybe don't fully understand it. It'd be good to get your view on when you think compliance should be brought into a business.
I think right at the outset. And I think what Velocity did well is they hired 3 senior compliance officers within the first 10 people of the business, which meant that I had a team around me that were experienced, that knew what they were doing, and that I could rely on. And so rather than cutting costs and just trying to get junior staff that weren't decision makers, I was able to get MLROs in that were decision makers that I could rely on, that helped build out the program. And I think you need a level of key people like that, and it depends on what your roadmap is, what your licensing strategy is, will determine how many staff you need, because you always need MLROs in local jurisdictions. But I'd always say get compliance in as early as possible. You don't want to build something to then find out a year later that you've done it wrong or it's incorrect. And then to apply for licenses, you need an MLRO. And if you're building from scratch, most MLROs, most senior compliance officers will want to have a say in how it's being built, because nobody wants to come into a company and find out it's being done wrong and land up in a remediation or a monitorship.
Obviously, we work together, on those compliances. What I would say is different with working with yourself and Eric is, I guess, the buy-in to compliance. I think that's abnormal for a lot of businesses to hire 3 people from the get-go. And I think that's maybe why you guys are maybe getting ahead and there's not a blocker or resistance. What would you say is good about the people that we put forward to you, maybe the people that we placed?
They had experience in traditional finance and in crypto. So Natalia, who's in Poland, she's worked at Credit Suisse and Paymenard. So you've got a big bank, and then you've got a crypto company that does something similar to what we do today. Louis in the UK, he's come from EY and then worked at Ramp Network. So similar kind of experience. And that crossover between the traditional finance and the crypto finance side of things is quite key, because while there's a significant amount of overlap between the two industries, there are nuances with crypto that I think are very important that someone that's experienced in the industry will understand. And not least because it drives the risk appetite of the compliance officer. You don't want someone that's never been in the space that's effectively too scared of their own shadow, especially when starting out from scratch, because the compliance officer can end up being a blocker. So you want someone that's level-headed, someone that's calm, someone that can really assess the risks for what they are, not for whatever extremities they think they might be.
I'd agree. And I think crypto, as you probably know, can be challenging to find good people. Maybe payments is a wider pool. I think what stood out from both of them is not just their intelligence to crypto and understanding about how they come across and how they deliver. How would you say they've adapted to Velocity and the value add that they've made so far to the business?
The adaptation was seamless.
Awesome.
I think they both just hit the ground running immediately. The great thing was, because I've held management positions in compliance, but this is the first time I'm holding this type of a position, and so the way that I manage is I don't want to have to delegate. I don't want to have to stand on top of someone and say, here is your task list for the day or for the week. And that's not, I've never had to do that with either of them. It was, they came in, they found areas that needed to be worked on. They went, I'm going to focus on this and get this done. And I went, great. Yeah. And so just people that I can rely on, people that can just pick things up and hit the ground running and take it all the way to completion and do it to an incredibly high standard. It's made my life incredibly easy.
Do you think it's hard to find that type of talent? Do you think there's many out there?
No. I mean, given that you've had 100% success rate with that, it's you might think that there is, but I've worked with a lot of compliance people in my career, and Louis and Natalia are both two of the most capable people I've worked with, and I know that they are both a rarity, and I'm incredibly lucky to be supported by them.
And they're both super bought in and top people, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. They've bought into the project, to what we're trying to do at Velocity. It helps that they've come in so early as well, so they've been there right at the ground up to help build things out. Their contribution's been invaluable.
Awesome, I'm glad. Going back to Velocity and the licenses, so we mentioned at the start, what's the plans for the rest of the year, next year, in terms of licensing and where you guys are going to be operating?
Yeah, so we're obviously UK headquartered. So we're in the process of applying for an EMI and an MLR application with the FCA. We're hoping to drop that as soon as we can. We're just going through the final stages of the application review process. Again, making sure that our application is as complete as it can be. So we're making the job for the FCA as easy as possible. Immediately after that, we will have to start working on our FSMA application. So the FCA has opened up a window between October and February next year where you have to have applied for your FSMA authorization. Otherwise, you won't be approved by September, October next year. So the UK is going to be a massive focus for us, and the lift from the current application to FSMA is going to be a really big one for us. So it's going to take a lot of work for us. Talks about MiCA. We are registered in Poland, so we are looking for alternative jurisdictions to apply in, and that's a massive focus for us, because if you aren't MiCA authorized, you can't operate in the EU. So it's pretty black and white, and been quite a tricky process for us to navigate. And then we've looked around globally. As I said, more regulators are coming out with local authorization programs. To operate in certain markets, you need to be regulated there. And so our licensing strategy has been driven by the commercial demand. If there's a market that we want to be operating in and you need to be authorized there, then that's a jurisdiction that we're going to go for. Yeah. I mean, to quote Eric, we want to be the most regulated stablecoin business in the world. Yeah. And he's not just saying that. I mean, he's really bought into that, and he's really pushing for that, because the type of clients that we're looking to work with are big corporations that are new to the space, and they want that regulated stamp of approval, because that's how they're going to trust that we're doing things properly. It's all well and good that I get on a phone call with their chief compliance officer and tell them what my program is, but unless the regulator has authorized us and validated what I'm saying, they're not going to believe me. And so the licenses have a massive commercial value to the business, and so the roadmap will be determined by where does it make commercial sense to be going for.
No, I'd have to agree. I think everyone, not just the people I've placed in product engineering, I think you've got an A team there. I think they're really building something special. So I'm excited to see the journey. Cool. Just a couple of closing questions, bit of fun, which I always ask the guests. Morning routine, John, are you perfectly planned, or is it chaotic in your house?
I used to be chaotic until my partner Anna moved in, and she's brought a lot more structure to the morning. And despite my grumbling and groaning about like an early bedtime and an earlier wake up, it's actually been great. So it's now, it's pretty choreographed. Wake up early, a good cup of coffee, do a bit of exercise, have a long time before actually rushing out the door. When I first started working, it was wake up, shower, out of the door within about 15 minutes. And so my mental health is a lot more settled today than it was back then.
Are you still running a lot?
Yeah, running a lot. Got a couple races coming up this year, so just training for that. That's my outlet. I mean, it's what I do to unwind. It's also where I do my thinking. I mean, some of the problems that I have to deal with, sitting at a desk, I'm not going to find a solution for it. But if I can go out and go for a nice long run and just mull it over in my head, I can often find some sort of clarity.
For the listeners, your runs, they're not 2K, are they?
No, I like marathons. I like endurance sports. I mean, long distance triathlon, long distance marathons, ultra marathons. In my last role, I lived in Switzerland for a year, so was living in the mountains, which was phenomenal. So if I could, I'd love to go back there.
Nice, awesome. Yeah. Guilty TV pleasure? Have you got a program or a series you like?
Not really guiltily, because my bedtime's so early. I'm barely. It's like 9 o'clock. Lights are out, or at least in bed. So we maybe get one episode in. Anna likes Married at First Sight.
Okay.
Which, fair enough. Guiltily, I've enjoyed a little bit. But yeah, not too much TV these days. Podcasts like Rest is History, so absolutely not guilty about that. Just absolutely love it.
Fair enough. And if you could swap lives with anyone, who would it be?
Oh, you know what? I'm a big cycling fan, and at the moment, the last few years, the world of cycling has been absolutely dominated by Tadej Pogačar.
I watched a bit of that on Netflix. The guy's an animal.
He's just this absolute specimen, and clearly he's worked incredibly hard. He's pretty much changed how cycle races happen single-handedly. I mean, he breaks away 100 kilometers from the end and rides solo and beats an entire peloton. So, I think being Tadej Pogačar would be pretty fun.
Be interesting to see how his body operates and moves.
Yeah, I mean, he must be. He trains until he bleeds from his eyes, I'm sure, and so it's probably not the easiest existence. And professional cyclists aren't exactly living the high life and partying and stuff. But the dedication that he brings into it, the structure that he has in his life, and the rewards that he's able to reap from that, I think would be pretty cool to emulate.
Is anyone close to him, or is he just miles ahead now?
Let's see the Tour this year. Jonas Vingegaard was the leading contender, and between the two of them, they'd won the last few Tours de France each. But the last couple of years, Pogačar's just run away with it. So hopefully Jonas can come back and challenge him. Yeah. Because you need that just to make it exciting. And I mean, Jonas is so far ahead of everyone else. Even him coming second is like a 5-minute gap to third. So it really is just the two of them. And then in the one-day races, you got Mathieu van der Poel and maybe Wout van Aert if he's come back from his injuries. That will make the classics in spring quite exciting.
So if you give it compliance, that's your full-time job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Top man. All right, John, great to have you on. Really appreciate you coming on. Cheers, mate.
Thanks very much, JT.